She was just a cub, malnourished, injured, and left for dead at the edge of a logging trail in Montana. He was a forest ranger who broke every rule to save her. For weeks, he fed her, cared for her, and stayed by her side until the moment came when she had to return to the wild. 8 years passed. He never saw her again. Until one morning, deep in the mountains, something massive stepped from the trees. And when she looked into his eyes, what she did next left everyone speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That helps us bring more real, inspiring stories like this one to you. The sun hadn't fully risen when Joel Tanner turned off the gravel service road and began the hike into the fire zone. He was a senior ranger with the National Forest Service, and that spring had been brutal, late snowmelt, early fires, and now windstorms had torn through the northern edge of Glacier National Park, leaving behind a trail of damage and, in many cases, orphaned wildlife. Joel had seen it before: elk calves, fawns, even the occasional black bear cub. But that morning was different. Halfway up the ridge, just past a red cedar, he heard it, a sound so soft it almost got swallowed by the wind. A whimper. He paused, turned, and then he saw her, a tiny grizzly cub, no bigger than a retriever, lying in the mud. She was curled in on herself, one leg bent unnaturally, her fur wet and matted with dried blood and sap. Her breathing was shallow, one eye was swollen shut. Joel didn't move for a full minute. He knew what the rule book said: don't interfere. Don't approach. Call it in. But something about her, she looked at him and didn't flinch, didn't growl, just blinked once, like she already knew she had no fight left. Joel exhaled. "Okay, little one," he whispered. "I'm breaking the rules for you." He carried her, wrapped in his parka, all the way back down the ridge. She weighed less than expected, her bones too sharp beneath her fur. She barely stirred. At the ranger station, his team stared in shock as he burst through the door. "You brought a grizzly cub here?" one asked. Joel ignored them. "She's going to die if we wait for transfer." And so began 5 weeks of quiet war. Joel stayed with her every day. He didn't name her, afraid it would mean too much. But he talked to her. He kept her warm. He cleaned the wound on her leg. He mixed a special mash of goat's milk and raw salmon for her to eat. On the third night, she lifted her head when she heard his voice. By the second week, she was hobbling behind him in the outdoor pen. By the fourth, she climbed onto his lap and fell asleep, all 40 pounds of her. Joel never told anyone about that. Eventually, Wildlife Services took her. They sedated her, tagged her, released her into a protected zone far from the ranger station. Joel stood on the ridge that morning, watching the helicopter lift away. She never looked back. But Joel never forgot. Joel hadn't stepped foot on that ridge in nearly a decade. 8 years had a way of dulling the sharp edges of memory, but not here. This mountain, with its jagged pines and deep silence, still carried the weight of a moment he had tried to fold away inside himself. The state had reassigned him for a few years, prescribed rotation, they called it. But everyone knew it was more than that. After the release of the cub, something in Joel had changed. He stopped taking assignments that brought him too close to the rescue zone. He said yes to paperwork, to boundary maintenance, to low-risk trails. And he never spoke about the cub. Not once. But now, he was back. The storm 2 weeks earlier had knocked out several firewatch sensors near the southern peaks. The trail was damaged, and Joel, ever the quiet workhorse, had volunteered to assess it alone. The path hadn't changed much, still running uneven, alive with moss-covered rocks and fallen needles. The air was cooler here, drier, but still held that scent of pine that he remembered from every night he'd spent watching over a dying cub in a field tent. As he climbed past the old marker tree, the one with the lightning scar down its center, a breath caught in his chest. That was where she had rested once, wrapped in his jacket, barely breathing. He shook his head and kept walking. By midday, he reached the clearing. He set down his pack, took a long drink of water, and pulled out the battered notebook he used for field logs. Wind stirred the branches above. A hawk called out somewhere beyond the ridge. Then, silence. Not the usual kind. Not the peaceful hush of nature at rest. But a silence that felt watched. Joel looked up. Nothing moved. He stood slowly. The trees were still. The shadows between them, long and soft. And then, just at the edge of his vision, something shifted. A shape, massive and slow, stepped from the tree line. His breath stopped in his chest. She stood there, tall, still, and impossible. Her fur was darker now, thick and rippling with the movement of a full-grown grizzly. A faint scar still marked her front leg. It was faint, but he saw it. Knew it. Her eyes locked on his. Everything inside Joel told him not to move. Not because he was afraid, but because something old and fragile had just resurfaced, and one wrong move might shatter it. She didn't growl. She didn't charge. She didn't turn. She simply stared. Joel slowly lowered himself to the ground, cross-legged, hands in his lap. And then, in the stillness, in the stretch of years compressed into one impossible moment, she took a step forward. Not fast. Not threatening. Just one step closer. His voice came out small, cracked, like a language he hadn't spoken in years. You remember? Another step. She was only 20 feet away now. Joel didn't breathe. She stopped, tilted her head slightly. Her massive frame stayed perfectly balanced. Perfectly calm. It was her. It was her, the cub he'd once held in a jacket. The cub who had laid her head in his lap when the nights were too cold. She was here, and she remembered. In that moment, Joel Tanner, the man who had once given everything to save a dying animal, felt something break wide open inside him, something he didn't even know he'd buried. Not fear. Not awe. Just recognition. A truth that neither time nor distance had erased. She didn't stay long. After a few minutes, she turned and walked back into the trees, but not before looking back once. Not with instinct. Not with threat. With memory. And for Joel, it was enough to collapse him to his knees. Because some bonds, even in the wild, never let go. Joel didn't sleep that night. Back at the ranger station, the usual drone of night insects and the soft creak of the wooden rafters didn't bring the comfort they once did. He sat on the edge of his bed long after midnight, still wearing the same mud-streaked boots, his pack untouched by the door. The image of her, full-grown, powerful, and yet still undeniably her, wouldn't leave his mind. She had looked at him. Really looked. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't projection. He knew what he had seen in her eyes. There was recognition, not the flickering caution of wild instinct, but a stillness, a weight that sat between them in the open air like a story neither of them had words to tell. Joel ran his hands through his graying hair. He wanted to believe he was being logical, grounded, that years of working in conservation had taught him better than to humanize wild animals. But logic had never stayed beside a dying cub in the dark, whispering stories into the fur of something most people feared. She had stayed alive. She had grown into everything she was meant to become. And she had come back. The next morning, Joel returned to the clearing. He didn't bring food. He didn't bring tools. Just a small folding stool and a journal he hadn't opened in years, the one he'd used during those long nights after her rescue. He sat in the same place and waited. 3 hours passed. The sun shifted. A pair of deer wandered nearby, unbothered by his presence. He nearly stood up to leave. Then, the brush parted, and there she was. This time, she came closer, 10 feet, then 7. Joel's heart pounded, but he didn't move. Her shoulders rolled as she walked, massive and silent. Her breath was steady. There was no fear in her. Not of him. Not of this moment. He swallowed. "Hey," he said softly. "You found me again." She lowered her head slightly, sniffed the air between them, and then, in a gesture so small it would have gone unnoticed to anyone else, she sat. Not fully, not relaxed, but enough. Her body at rest. Her gaze still locked on his. It was impossible. It was undeniable. Joel whispered, "I didn't know if you'd made it." His throat tightened. The forest blurred. "I hoped. But I didn't know." The wind shifted. A pine branch creaked above them. And she stayed. For nearly 20 minutes, the two of them remained like that, two survivors of different worlds, staring across the space-time had carved between them. Joel didn't need her to do anything else. This was already more than he had ever dreamed. Eventually, she rose. She turned back toward the trees, slow and steady. But again, before she disappeared, she looked over her shoulder. That look, it held something deeper than memory. It held trust. And it broke something open in Joel that had hardened slowly over the years, the quiet, patient grief of loving something wild, something you could never keep. He sat there long after she left, the forest closing back in around him. And for the first time in years, Joel felt like something inside him had come home. Not because she had stayed, but because she had chosen to return. Joel didn't tell anyone at first. What happened on that ridge was something sacred, something he feared would unravel the moment he put it into words. It was easier to let people believe he was just doing routine work, hiking familiar trails. The station barely questioned him. Everyone knew Joel kept to himself. That was how he had always been. But secrets rarely stay quiet when they're this loud inside you. And the forest has more witnesses than we think. The following week, a pair of biologists arrived at the station to check trail cams in the area, routine monitoring, fire zone assessments. Joel offered to guide them partway, not thinking much of it until one of them paused at a fresh indentation in the mud. "Bear track," she murmured. Joel nodded, trying to hide the catch in his breath. "A big one. Adult female. That's close." He didn't speak. Later that night, when they returned, one of the techs pulled up a time-stamped image from a trail camera just 3 miles from the ridge. It was her. The Ursa, alone, poised beneath the shadow of the pines, staring directly into the lens. Not startled. Not aggressive. Just watching. The photo gave Joel chills. She had passed through the same forest on the same day he'd returned. Maybe even followed his scent. Maybe even waited. A week later, she returned to the clearing. Joel had started keeping a routine, same hour, same seat, same silence. And she came. always alone. Always watching. Sometimes she stayed 5 minutes, sometimes longer. Each time, she came closer. Once, she laid down. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just sat with her. But word spreads even when no words are spoken. A young seasonal ranger caught a glimpse of her one afternoon. He mentioned it to someone over lunch. And by the end of the week, whispers of a bold grizzly near the southern trail had reached the station supervisor. That's when the emails started. Fish and wildlife. Conservation officers. Even a wildlife filmmaker from Denver who had heard a rumor about a ranger who sits with a grizzly. Joel felt the pressure closing in. The forest wasn't just his anymore. Neither was she. One evening, Joel sat on the cabin porch, watching the trees sway under a violet sky. A question kept circling in his mind, quiet but relentless. If you love something wild, do you protect it by keeping it close? Or by keeping it hidden? He thought about the cub he had once rescued, how fragile she had been, how uncertain her future was. And now, here she was. Alive. Thriving. Still choosing to be near him, even when she didn't have to. Joel realized the truth then. This wasn't his story anymore. It was hers. And maybe, just maybe, the world needed to see it. But not for fame. Not for science. For faith. In memory. In connection. In the kind of quiet love that doesn't demand. Doesn't hold. Just stays. The next day, Joel placed an old trail camera on a tree 20 yards from the clearing. He didn't tell anyone, he didn't need to. But when she returned that evening and paused beneath the branches, the golden light catching her fur, her massive body moving with the grace of something both ancient and alive, the camera blinked once and captured the moment that would change everything. The image made its way to the internet in the quietest way possible. Joel hadn't planned to share it, but one evening, while reviewing trail footage to make sure it was working properly, he paused on a single frame. There she was, the Ursa, captured in perfect stillness. Sunlight filtered through the trees, outlining the curve of her shoulder. Her head was turned slightly, eyes fixed just beyond the camera toward where Joel had been sitting, legs crossed, hands resting loosely in his lap. He wasn't in the frame, but somehow the moment between them was. Joel stared at the screen for a long time, then almost without thinking, he sent the photo to an old friend, Sarah Lindstrom, a former field biologist turned conservation journalist. He didn't include much context, just a note, she came back. He figured Sarah would understand. He didn't expect her to post it, but she did. And within 24 hours, the world knew. The article was simple, no sensationalism, no manufactured miracle. Just the facts. 8 years ago, a ranger found an injured grizzly cub. He cared for her, saved her life, then let her go. Now she had returned as an adult and had begun quietly sitting near him in the forest. No tricks. No training. No fences. Just present. The article ended with the photo and a single line beneath it, "Some bonds are never broken, even in the wild." The reaction was immediate. Joel's inbox exploded, thousands of emails, some from biologists, others from strangers, many from people who had no connection to conservation but recognized something deeply human in what they saw. One message stood out. A woman in her 60s wrote, "When my husband died, I thought I'd forgotten how to feel anything. Then I saw that bear looking at you like she remembered, and I remembered too. Thank you." Another came from a war veteran in Arizona. "That bear didn't owe you anything, but she came back. I've been waiting 10 years for someone to come back to me. You gave me hope that maybe one day someone will. Joel didn't know how to respond. He printed the messages, folded them carefully, and placed them in a wooden box beside the window. And every time she returned, he read them aloud, softly, without expectation, without performance, just so she would hear what she had given the world. But not every reaction was kind. News trucks began showing up at the station gate. Tourists asked for directions to the Grizzly spot. Wildlife officials called, warning him not to encourage interaction. One email came with a threat: if you're not careful, someone's going to come hunt her. Not every man is as gentle as you. That night, Joel didn't sleep. The forest no longer felt like just trees and trail markers. Now it carried eyes, and with eyes came danger. She didn't come the next morning, nor the day after. And a quiet panic began to build in Joel's chest, not the kind born from fear of harm, but from fear of guilt. Had he broken something sacred? Had sharing her story stolen her safety? On the third day, Joel walked the ridge alone. The sky was heavy, storms building. He reached the clearing, soaked in gray light, and sat down on the old stump. "I'm sorry," he said softly. His voice barely carried. "I didn't mean to turn you into a symbol." A branch cracked in the trees behind him. He turned, heart pounding, and there she was. Stillness in motion, stronger than before. She walked slowly into the open, stopped a few feet from him, and for the first time, lowered herself fully. She lay down. Her eyes never left his, and in that silence, Joel understood. She hadn't stayed away because she was scared. She had stayed away because she'd needed to be sure that nothing had changed, that he hadn't changed. And now, knowing that he hadn't, she had returned. A week had passed since the photo went viral, and everything Joel knew about silence had vanished. The quiet trails were now lined with tire tracks. Camera crews had come and gone. Wildlife officials stopped by more often than usual, and even though most of them acted like they were just doing their jobs, Joel could see it in their eyes. They all wanted to see her. But she was gone. Ever since the last time she appeared, when she laid down beside him in the clearing, she had vanished again into the trees, not scared, not wounded, just absent. Joel knew it wasn't random. It was intentional. Because even a wild heart knows when it's being watched too closely, and she had been watched by too many. Every day, Joel sat in the clearing, hoping, not calling, not tempting, just sitting, waiting. But the forest stayed quiet. The shadows shifted, but the space she used to fill remained untouched. People kept reaching out, letters, emails, messages with questions like, "When will she come back?" and, "Can we see her if we visit?" Joel never answered. He couldn't. Because something sacred had been broken. Not by her. Not by him. But by the weight of being seen. One evening, as the sky turned the color of cold ash and the first stars blinked awake, Joel stood on the edge of the clearing and made a decision. He returned the next morning with only a shovel and a wooden box. No camera. No gear. Just silence. He walked to the old pine tree, the one she had once passed beneath, and gently dug a small hole into it. He placed the trail camera, the memory cards, the photo that had changed everything, and finally, a box filled with printed letters. All of them, the good, the painful, the hopeful. He buried it all, not to erase her story, but to protect it. That night, he opened his journal one last time and wrote, "You came back because you trusted me. I told the world because I was proud, but you are not mine. And if trust means anything, it means letting you vanish again on your terms. I won't come tomorrow, but if you ever need me, I'll still be here. He closed the notebook, slid it into the drawer, and left the lamp on, not because he expected her, but because it felt like a goodbye. Joel didn't return to the clearing the next day, or the next. 2 weeks passed. The station grew quiet again. The vans stopped arriving, the inbox stopped filling, the headlines faded like ripples on water, and the forest took a breath. One afternoon, Joel walked down by the river. He didn't plan to, it just felt like the right thing to do. He stood by the water, the sun low, the wind moving through the grass, and then he saw them, tracks, large, clear, unmistakable, fresh. Across the river, half blurred by golden light and trees, a shadow, massive, still, watching her. Joel didn't move. She didn't come closer. She didn't need to. She was letting him know she was still there, still watching, still remembering. Then, with the grace of something that belonged only to the wilderness, she turned and melted back into the trees. Joel stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, heart full and aching. He didn't chase her, didn't try to follow, because now he understood, it had never been about holding on. It had always been about being willing to let go and still be chosen. 15 years had passed. The ranger station had new paint, a new roof, and a new generation of staff. Tourists still came, though fewer each year. Some asked about the photo, the one of the grizzly that had once been seen near the southern ridge. Most of them didn't know the full story, only pieces, just enough to ask, was it real? Most were told the same thing, it happened a long time ago. Joel Tanner had retired 10 years earlier, no ceremony, no speeches, just one final walk along the trail he'd helped carve and protect. Then he disappeared into the silence he loved so much. No one heard from him again. But his story hadn't disappeared. It was waiting in a drawer. Eli Parker was a college intern sent to the station to digitize old files. Most of the work was dry, spreadsheets, equipment logs, incident reports. But one drawer stuck as he opened it, the wood swollen from years of damp. Inside, beneath a stack of maps, was a notebook wrapped in waxed cloth. Eli almost left it alone, but something about the weight of it, physical and emotional, told him he shouldn't. He opened it and read the first line. She came back. For the next 3 days, Eli read every page, the rescue, the silence, the return, the photo, the disappearance, the goodbye. It didn't feel like a report, it felt like a love letter to nature, to something wild, to something lost and found and released again. At the very end, Joel had written one final entry. If someone finds this, know that you don't need to find her. Just sit, wait. If she comes, she comes. And if she doesn't, remember she already did. Eli didn't tell anyone. He didn't share the notebook. He didn't post it online. But one morning, he packed a thermos and a folding stool and followed the old trail Joel had marked in the journal. Most of it was overgrown. Moss climbed up broken stones. The trees were thicker now. Eventually, he found the clearing. It wasn't a place that begged for attention, no monuments, no bench, just a patch of grass beneath a pine tree, a bit of worn earth, and the feeling that something had once lingered here. He sat, waited, no phone, no camera, just the forest, just silence. Hours passed. Nothing came. But Eli didn't feel disappointed. He felt calm. And then, as the sun began to lower, something moved at the edge of the trees. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. Just a shape, golden brown, massive, still, watching. Eli didn't move. Didn't breathe. He watched as the figure stepped once into the clearing, paused, and stared through him, not at him, but through him, as if looking for something older, something deeper. Maybe she didn't see a stranger. Maybe she saw a memory. Maybe she felt it, the same stillness, the same trust. She didn't come closer. She didn't need to. She just stood there long enough to let him understand, then turned and disappeared into the trees. That night, Eli added one final note to Joel's journal. She came back, not to you, not to me, but to this place. And maybe that's enough. If this story touched your heart, remember, some connections defy logic. Some bonds ask for nothing in return. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is to let something go and still choose to wait. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who still believes in the quiet power of nature, memory, and second chances. Because she didn't need a cage, she just needed to know he'd always be there.